These two archetypes are perhaps the most famous types of gentlemen in the world. But despite their close ancestral relations, there are some key differences between the British gentleman and the Southern gentleman. I've never seen a video comparing these two, so I'm going to talk about some of the differences between the two cultures, the different traits that these men embody, and some of the more desirable characteristics that you might want to adopt on your quest to become a young gentleman. So a little backstory about myself. I was born in the state of Alabama, I grew up in England, and then I moved back to the US when I was 23. So I identify with both the South and with Britain. And today I try and embody some of the best parts of both cultures. So let's take a look at both the British gentleman and the Southern gentleman to see what we can learn from them. Starting off with the Southern gentleman, one of his finest traits is undoubtedly his hospitality. If you've ever spent time in the South, you'll know they are incredibly warming and welcoming people. The Southern gentleman makes others feel comfortable, included, and respected. If he hears that you have a dilemma, he will go out of his way to help you resolve it, expecting nothing in return. The Southern gentleman also addresses everyone he meets in a formal and respectful way, calling women ma'am and men sir. And this applies even to Gen Z Southerners. When it comes to service workers, the Southern gentleman is a generous tipper and believes in rewarding hard work. Now let's look at some of the less desirable stereotypes about the Southern gentleman. The Southern gentleman is less likely to be well-traveled and aware of other cultures outside of his own. Many Southerners stay within a few states for their entire life, taking little interest in cultures from abroad. Perhaps this is controversial for me to say, but if I had to make a general criticism of Southern culture, it would be that it is more intolerant of the progressive ideals that have become the status quo in Europe and major coastal cities in the US. Now, in terms of style, the Southern gentleman dresses in an elegant and formal way that reflects the needs of his climate and environment. In the South, it gets very hot and humid, so Southern gentlemen like to wear light coloured suits and use fabrics such as seersucker. The Southern gentleman is not afraid to stand out, and he enjoys dressing to impress, especially at big social events like the Kentucky Derby. Now let's take a look at the British gentleman. The British gentleman is all about principles and values. He believes in duty, courage, and loyalty. His word is his honour, and he will stick to commitments even when it no longer seems practical or pleasant to do so. The English gentleman has a great respect for tradition, but also an appetite for cultures outside of his own. The English gentleman is more likely to have travelled, especially because the cultural delights of Europe are right on his doorstep. The schooling system in England also puts a greater emphasis on world history, with the study of Latin, the classics, and modern languages. But despite his broader worldview, the English gentleman is not always as outgoing as his American counterpart. The English gentleman is by nature more reserved. For example, he is less trusting of others and less likely to bring outsiders into his home or social circle. So if you were to move to London and start becoming a regular at a bar, you could be sitting at that bar for many months by yourself before you start making friends. Compare that to a bar in the South where you're almost guaranteed to strike up a conversation with somebody next to you within the first 5 minutes, and likely leave with an invitation to their garden party the following weekend. Now, going back to the British gentleman, he's also more likely to look the other way when somebody else is in need, imagining that people would prefer instead if everybody just minded their own business. It's not out of rudeness that the English gentleman is more introverted, more it's a form of respect for other people's privacy and problems. The English gentleman also reserves his more formal greeting styles for people that he considers to be of or above his own social standing. For example, an English man does not walk into the cafe and call the waitress ma'am. And he is far less generous with tipping because this is not an expected part of British culture. Now, there is a more rigid social class structure in Britain that exists outside of money and status. Sometimes that holds the British gentleman back from making choices that are risky, daring, and unorthodox. And I think these personality traits are reflected in his style choices too. The English gentleman wears structured suits in dark, muted colours, only switching to light blues and light greys in the summer months. He's much more self-conscious about his style choices than his American counterpart and prefers not to stand out. Out in the country, he wears items such as waxed jackets, Wellington boots, and tweed tailoring. Now, of course, these are all generalizations, and you can never say that somebody has X, Y, Z traits because they're either a Southern gentleman or a British gentleman. But these are all my personal observations from my lived experience as somebody who considers the term gentleman to be one of the highest forms of compliment. I would say that I have embodied traits of both the British gentleman and the Southern gentleman, but I find that my personality leans more towards the Southern gentleman because I'm quite an extroverted person. I enjoy meeting new people, talking to strangers, and making others feel welcome. Manners are important to me, and I like to show respect to people, whoever they are, wherever I go. But on the other hand, I like to travel a lot, learn about new cultures, and experience new ways of doing things. I don't place a large amount of value on upholding traditions. I prefer to discover my own way of doing things and my own way of showing respect to people. In terms of style, I'm perhaps less tied to a physical location than an English gentleman or a Southern gentleman. As you may have seen in my 3 best dressed areas in the US video, I've taken inspiration not only from British styles, but also Southern styles, preppy, American, and even European influences. So that's kind of the melting pot that has created my personal look, which is of course still a work in progress. Considering the two countries are so closely linked, there are some vast differences between British and American culture. But this is what has made my experience of living between the two so fascinating. As I continue to travel and visit new cultures in 2024, I look forward to sharing my experiences with you here on this channel. But for now, let me know in the comments which archetype you identify with more closely. Is it the British gentleman or the Southern gentleman? I look forward to seeing you in the next video.